Hello, hello. Hey, Linda, how you doing?
So can you hear
Anybody
me?
else that's out there, how you doing? Yes. Hey
Yep.
there. We're here today with Mark, my good friend Mark, the Hodd, as we call him.
Okay.
You
Yeah, it could be
you may have
worse.
heard you may have heard in the video before this. I'm planning to get him on the Friday before we go for the banner tour on leap year there. We're gonna go for some dim sum. So
That's me. Dim
that's what
sum. That's me.
dude. It's good stuff, dude. I'm telling you. You're gonna end up thanking me.
Okay.
Trust me. It's good. It's
Okay.
yeah, delicious.
I'll take your word for it. Yeah, I know. I know what dim sum is, but we'll see the quality of it in your
Interesting.
selection.
Well,
So
it'll be interesting to get your
yeah.
opinion, seeing as you,
Okay.
Mister Globetrotter. To be interesting to
Yeah.
get your
Okay.
take on it. So, anyways, so obviously we're here today talking a little bit more about Scottish independence. We're talking about the
Yes.
UK. We're talking about Brexit and the EU and all things wrapped up in this whole little kind of wacky little situation that's kind of going on over there. I mean, I'm not here to criticize if Brexit's right or wrong so much as I'm here to criticize whether or not the will of the democratic will of the people gets heard. And in terms of Westminster, yeah, England gave a mandate for Brexit, but I think elsewhere in the UK, not so much. And barreling forward with this thing, it was, I think, problematic.
Hey,
Yeah, you seem to just drop out there.
Mr. Mr.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, and I apologize to the listeners. I apologize for the listeners. It's something very right. But your side, I'm not sure whether you're just holding. Look
How does
like you're
this sound
frozen
to
on my side.
everybody?
So,
Okay.
um,
So how does
question
this
that because
sound,
I think
Linda? Let us know how it sounds. If you
fade
can't hear
away with
me
some
though, you're
questions
probably
that way.
okay. So okay, let me just find out. Okay, so it's all good. So it sounds fine to her. Okay. So
Oh, all
anyways,
right.
with all the recent goings ons, I figured why not
Yeah.
look at one of the more recent, you know, examples of someone, a sovereign country, winning back their independence from Britain. And that would be one of them would be Australia, obviously your homeland there. And so I wanted to ask you, how did it go down back in 1901 when Australia made its bid and became independent? Like,
Yep.
what was going on? Like, I guess maybe a little bit politically. What was the political climate? What was England or Britain just like, oh, okay, yeah, see, c'est la vie, see you later, or were they maybe a little contentious about it? I mean, if you could let us know a little bit about it.
Okay. So I guess the best way to answer that with a little bit of history. So the Australian
Right.
continent always inhabited by indigenous populations for 50,000, and they're the first
Right.
Australians. Settlement happened when the Brits sent out all their prisoners to Australia.
Yeah.
they,
Right.
and their prisons were, so they sent them out here. And they did it in areas of Australia that in those days were called colonies. They are the states of Australia today, but they were connected to the UK, but independent colonies. So leading up to 1901, which was only 113 years after being set, the 6 states of Australia which is Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria, Tasmania, South Australia, and Western Australia, obviously were leading to first agree upon a constitution that everyone would be happy with, and that took some time to get. And the transition to an independent nation was smooth. There was no fight, probably obviously differences of opinion from various quarters, but it happened fairly, and it was just felt. It's like it's like a child maturing in a family.
Britain didn't send the redcoats in
of England for a long time. None of that, and control of England for a long time, and it was just a maturity thing. So, and the loyalties was there, and they've always been there ever since. 20 years after that, 119 years after that, we still have a close affinity to England or to Great Britain as a whole, and we're part of the Commonwealth of Nations, about 30 or 40 nations under the Commonwealth. In Canada, it's the same as is New Zealand, and but we don't need to be stuck to the mothership.
Right. Uh-oh.
All our life, truly independent nation, or be at war with them, or be angry. We have a special relationship, and that's just so.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, it's it's. I was just thinking, it's. I mean, I just figure they're, at the time Britain was losing its, grip on all of its colonies. I mean, it went from one time, really controlling 3/4 of the landmass of the world, with the East India Trading Company and everything. They were getting cut back and cut back and cut back. I mean, I just figure there must have been some fight in them regarding, letting Australia just walk away. I don't know, but maybe I'm wrong. But I just figured there must probably have been, I don't know, some contention at some point, but maybe not.
If I understand the essence of your question, forgive me because the sound's a little
right.
The separate from the was not something in any way that was things ties with culturally and in historical terms was still enhanced in trade and in immigration rules and a whole lot of things, including British people and other nations as well who came and migrated to Australia to live here. You're not every prisoner. In fact, I think the last convicts that came to Australia were, someone will tell me better, but I think it's probably or something like that. So we're vast.
Right. That's interesting. Immigration rules. So during the independence,
beginning. So
during the independence,
so the relation, the analogy that
I was going to say, so there was negotiated back then.
Immigrant independence. Did you say?
Well, no. What I was asking is it sounds like obviously before independence, passing freely between, Britain and Australia would have been fine, right? But obviously after independence, it would have immigration, whatever would have had to been ironed out between the two sovereign countries, right? So what did what does that look like? What did that look like then, and is it the same today? If you're still there. Hello, Mark.
Right. By the way, I turned off my video.
How much of that
sound,
did you
so,
get?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yes.
What you're saying, I think you were saying after the immigration, what were the rules about immigration? I think that's what you were asking me. Was that
Essentially,
correct?
Yeah. I figured they had to be established at that point because there hadn't been any previously, right?
Yes. Well, I mean, Australia is an eclectic nation, and its immigration very restrictive in the beginning and racist in the beginning. Australia had a very racist immigration policy, restricting immigrants, if you like. But since about
Wow.
1960, the mid-60s, those rules have changed. And we have every conceivable nation of immigrants in Australia.
Right.
The big wave of new immigrants came after the Second World War in the form of Italians and Greeks looking for, and then in more recent times, migrants from Asia, from the Vietnam, and everywhere since. So, whilst Australia's immigration unsavoury distant past, it's a very open policy now, but it does have rules to make sure the people who are coming in, they come in. One is family reunion, that is people who have family already here. The second is targeted immigrant people with skills that they're after.
Oh, I see.
Because they may be lacking the quantum of skills in Australia. Refugees is the third category that we take in, I think, around about, I'm sorry, about 100,000 a year. That might be a little high, got substantial, and those migrate in the country because they can add a lot economic. So,
right.
But if I can relate all this in story, this question of maturing society, being ready to stand on their own, it doesn't mean that there's conflict previous mothership, if I can call it that. And Australia, as much as we love Britain, we're a very different nation, and we respect Britain for whom they are and how they run their ship. But we have our style in Australia that's ours. You need to respect each individual nations for whom they are and their cultural matters to them. Across the pond here to New Zealand, we have our dear friends in New Zealand, a small nation. It's only about 4 million people. Very strongly independent, very strongly their own style of doing things. With Australians, we have shit with New Zealand in terms of immigration and crossing the borders. But it doesn't mean that they can't be a strong, powerful nation just because they're small or because they have a different way of doing things.
Yeah.
So I think the important thing from a Scottish point of view is clearly the people determining their own future. That's unquestionably the case. And the majority, I don't mean to say it, it's just the majority of Scots wanted to be independent. That's what should happen.
Certainly. So, and it shouldn't be being blocked. I mean, the way it strikes me is the fact that the referendum is being so people are so afraid of it. The current government over in Westminster and they're afraid to consider it because they are kind of looking at things right now and the way the wind's going. They know the way Scotland voted in the EU referendum of Brexit. and they know how Scotland voted pretty decisively, which is one instance here in UK politics where we can use that word, where there was a decisive vote by the Scots that they wanted to remain in the EU. And in fact, it was one of the major sticking points that the agents of Westminster were coming up north and saying. And that is to say, the 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 best chance for you to remain in the EU in Scotland is to remain part of the UK. And that was a big part of how they won that referendum, you know? And so you got to
Yep.
take all those things into account and realize that, you know, it's time for them to reconsider it, because a huge material change based upon the promise, the biggest promise that was made to them in the first referendum, that has now changed. It is now reversed, and I believe that warrants the Scottish people to once again determine how they want their future to go. Why I talk about, why I wonder about Queen and Country and all that is I can understand there's going to be a section of people there in Scotland, Mark, that
Yep.
fought for Queen and Country. They developed relationships and friendships in the trenches, and came back home, and even maybe came back home without friends that they remember, and so those experiences are very, very dear to them and a part of who they are, and the thought of the UK breaking up, even though they may hate the way Westminster treats Scotland, the thought of the UK breaking up can be so upsetting to them that can cause them to want to vote no. And I just figured, from what I can see, is all countries, these countries that have won their independence, all still seem to have a fair amount of respect for Queen and Country in terms of the Queen and the British monarchy and all that stuff. Like, it's still there's still a connection, whether be it's not strong anymore. It's not, it's not it's not as strong as it may have once been. Obviously, the countries are these sovereign nations are all now moving in their own directions, and so they have less ties to the old way. But
Yeah.
but it still seems like it's there. Obviously, you guys still put the Queen on some of your money. And
Yep.
in fact, I got it confirmed. Even Canada does that. Still has the
Yep.
Queen on some of their money.
Yep.
That's a nod. You know.
But what you'll find is that the people who, I guess I'll answer it in two ways. There's a group of people in any nation, in any Commonwealth nation, particularly who are older, have a greater affinity with the royal family and the monarch because
Right.
that's their history, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that they're continuously becoming a smaller population, right, of the whole of that nation. That is, those that have that,
Mm-hmm.
if you like, strong emotional connection. Like
Right.
Australia, like as we did in us, we fought with the South Africans and whomever else was on our side, and same
Right.
close bonds and ties. But it doesn't mean that to hang on to their, you know, coattails as to make ourselves feel good. In fact, I would say you can feel better about your nation when you have the ability to be independent and take control of your decisions and work with
Yeah.
others. Clearly, if Scotland gained its independence, it would have very, very ties economically, socially, immigration-wise with England, Northern Ireland if they were still in
Yeah.
the Union. It doesn't matter the fact that you're an independent nation. I mean, the United States and Australia are worlds apart, literally. But we jump and help each other at every moment possible when that need arises, because that's what
Right.
you do. Because that's what you do for good people, and
Yeah.
there would be no difference in that. You know, you guys sent a bunch of firefighters out here recently to help us with our fire problem that we're having.
Right.
And we've done reverse. We fought beside each other in the wars. Not always the greatest wars in the world, but we believed in them at the time.
Right.
It's a maturity thing, control of your own destiny. Proud
Yeah.
people, they're very to have caliber of Nicholas Charge. My God, she's as good a politician as I've ever seen. And she knows.
Yeah. She's great.
And and you know, I just think it's really a little bit called Boris Johnson, and I don't think it necessarily total
Westminster
British population to think that there's somehow a more important group of people than the folk up in the north of the island, right? That is in Scotland.
Mm-hmm.
And
right.
To deny the Scottish people their will. And you can't deny it, by the way. You can fight it, you can talk about it not happening, but if the will is there, it will happen. You can either do it in a constructive way or a destructive way, but eventually it will happen if the will is there. And by the way, as I've said many times, it should be at least 60%, 65%, not just 50. If you had half the people wanting to be independent and half not, even if it was one vote in favour of independence more, that's not enough. I'm afraid. Right? You're leaving too many people behind. You've got to around the mark to know that you're carrying the nation with your plans, which was one of the big problems with Brexit.
And that's
itself, of course.
Brexit didn't have that either. Right? Exactly. Yeah, you're absolutely right. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I agree. I mean, Nicola is pretty outstanding. The S&P, from everything I can see, the S&P have done right by the people of Scotland. They've done things for Scotland. See, like Mark, I'm worried. I just had Eunice on with Sharon recently. It was Eunice and Sharon and I having a discussion, and Eunice told us, what's going to happen with her daughter when Brexit happened, and that meant they were going to the cost that their daughter was going to incur to get the insulin she needed was going to just astronomically go through the roof because they weren't in the EU anymore. I mean, I worry about diabetes. Isn't just some very rare disease that only happens to a very few number of people. Diabetes is something that is kind of a problem for everybody, and it's not.
Huge,
I mean, I'm not saying.
It's a huge problem for every Western nation. It's probably the number health issue beyond an obvious epidemic as a kind of endemic problem. Diabetes and general health issues arising from that is probably every Western nation's biggest health problem.
Yeah, and so it's just like I now shudder to think of what it's going to be like for some families to be able to, how much it's going to kind of mess with them financially to be able to provide the insulin that they need for one of their loved ones to live. It's just a troubling and unwholesome thought for me. And that was something that Eunice brought to my attention that I was just like, wow, not good. And I know there's going to be other things,
The truth about anything is that we're always more powerful as a collective than we are as individuals. But collective doesn't mean you have to be the same. So
Right.
the European Union made Europe a much more stable and safer place and a more productive place. It wasn't a perfect, but it was a lot better than it had been in terms of, independent countries trying to struggle their way through that. In the absence of European solidarity, could have easily fallen to more nefarious influences, as had been done so in history. So, I travel Europe a lot. I mean, there are 27, I think, countries that are in the European Union. They're all fiercely independent countries. They're not just licking the bootstraps of Paris or Bonn or wherever. They're all
Brussels.
independent countries,
Right.
and they love who they are. They have their own cultures and nearly have all their own languages.
Right.
Many have their own currency, euro, but they see the value in being in a group. It's a team game, the world, and you're more powerful as a group. And
Yeah.
and but it doesn't mean you give up on who you are as an independent nation. You can still be independent and be successful in the EU. And
Yeah.
the English, the simplicity and ignorantly simplistic way England has decided to accept a very poorly constructed, leave the European Union was
Yeah.
disgraceful, personally.
Right.
And now I don't, if they want to leave, fine, I respect that, but you've got to go with a good majority. And
Yeah.
if other independent nations, because they're all independent nations, Scotland should be allowed to be in charge of its destiny, just
Yeah.
like the Republic of Ireland, not Northern Ireland. The Republic of Ireland is a separate country, member of the EU, and it's attached to Northern Ireland, and it's across the Wales and England. And why can't Scotland
Yeah.
be given its own independence? And I can tell you this for
Yeah.
sure, because history will bear this out. You can resist, Westminster can resist for so long, but you will not stop it. Might take a bit longer.
I don't think so either. I agree. I agree.
So
And another thing, Mark, I turned on the news today. Had to go make a
yep,
service call real quick, and as I was testing somebody's TV, turned on the news. Just happened to be a news channel, and it was two guys talking about Brexit and what was going on with the UK and was it all being accepted. And the one guy basically said something along the lines of, "Oh well, yeah, Brexit's going just fine. Boris Johnson went up north of the border, and he campaigned up there and said, after they did Brexit, he would be sending a bunch of money up north to, or sending whatever up north to help make this or that or whatever." And this guy actually said, and so that so that showed in the election results. It's like I was sitting there listening to that, going, I know better than that. I know that's wrong.
yep,
But how many
yep.
people are like me and know that what that guy just said was a load of crap? Because the reality is Boris Johnson lost half of his conservative MPs in Scotland. That's
Yep.
what the reality is. With the Scottish National Party gaining 48 out of 59 total seats in Scotland.
Yep.
So it's like when I hear that guy on the news saying that, and that's getting passed off.
That's truth.
Not a huge fan of Donald Trump, but I will say thank you to him for one thing, for coining the phrase fake news, because that's exactly what I saw today was fake news. That was the fakest news I ever saw.
Yep.
So.
But, it comes back to a really important issue that you and I have spoken about before, and that is democracy responsibility. And that is the responsibility of every citizen who's eligible to participate in voting to be involved intellectually, to understand the issue and then to reflect their view of those issues by going out and voting. Until the people have the power, good or bad, in whatever country it is. And there's a huge malaise in a lot of countries that receive for granted, and it's not successful when it's like that. So.
All right. Well, it looks like we've been having issues on and off, but I think it's been a good discussion, and I think we're gonna have to try to pick this up at a later date when we can maybe iron out some of the issues. But I know it's been interesting, obviously, to hear a little bit about Australia's path to independence and that sort of thing, and I do know what you mean about the Aboriginal tribes there, because I remember when we went to the Sydney Opera House, that there was always even everywhere, even at the footy match, the Melbourne Convention Center, there was always a message at the beginning that was giving a nod to the native, Aboriginal people there of Australia. Yeah. So I know that they take that very seriously.
We call that acknowledgement of country, which means, we recognize that the land in which we live was first owned by, original Australians.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And to, let's say, make better what was effectively an invasion. It's very important that we acknowledge the first owners in all nations around the world.
Absolutely.
And can't ameliorate them by showing respect for the past and doing all the action. So, New Zealand do it the same with their
absolutely
normal treaty between their indigenous population called the treaty that acknowledges that they were the first inhabitants of that land. So, yeah.
Right. Okay, that's interesting. That's cool. All right, man.
Yeah.
Well, like I said, we'll get together again soon, with hopefully a little less technical difficulties. Because I definitely do want to pick up the conversation again with you. Oh, no worries, no worries, buddy. I think I'm sorry. Been working well enough that people will get the gist of what we were talking about. So.
Well, I'm actually now sitting outside in the evening. Oh, I'm not sure what time it is now. It's it's 8 p.m. on a Sunday night here. So I stepped outside to try to improve the reception.
Yeah, I heard you. Yeah, I did. I heard you going through the door. I could hear it squeak. Heard some birds out there.
Yeah.
Anyway, so, but yeah, it's been a pleasure, obviously. And like I said, we'll have to pick it up again real soon. You may be interested in the upcoming. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah, two quick things. I'm looking forward to catching up with yourself on the 28th and the 29th of February. And that should be a great time together. And all those that can come to that along with it will be wonderful.
Yep, absolutely.
And I see what's going on with the state's response to Kathleen Zellner's appeal submission. So there should be a pretty interesting.
Yeah. Yep. Just did a video over on the MAM channel about that.
Yeah.
And so yeah, it's going to be an exciting month. So
yeah.
All righty. Hey everybody, thank you for being here. And thank you for tuning in. And thank you, Mark, for being here. And if you haven't already, please hit subscribe. And we'll see you.
Okay. Bye for now.